Welcome to Music Legendarium. Amy Winehouse was only 27 years old when she died. For many people, she remained above all the singer with the striking beehive hairstyle, the dramatic eyeliner, and the headlines about alcohol and drugs. But that image does not do her justice. Behind the public figure was an extraordinarily gifted musician, someone who had immersed herself in jazz as a child more deeply than many professional singers do in an entire lifetime. To truly understand Amy Winehouse, we have to begin long before her worldwide fame, in an ordinary house in North London, where music was part of everyday life. Amy Jade Winehouse was born on September 14, 1983, in Southgate, a district in North London. She grew up in a Jewish family. The family was not strictly religious, but it maintained its traditions with pride. Music, however, played a much greater role than religious rituals. Her father, Mitch, worked as a taxi driver and loved singing songs by Frank Sinatra. Her mother, Janice, was a pharmacist and brought calm and stability to family life. But one of the most important influences on Amy was her grandmother, Cynthia. She introduced Amy to the world of jazz at an early age. Cynthia was elegant, lively, and convinced that her granddaughter would one day become someone special. While many children of the 1980s were listening to pop music, the Winehouse home was filled with the voices of Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington, and Tony Bennett. Amy did not simply hear this music in the background. She listened closely to every nuance and tried to understand why certain voices could have such a powerful emotional effect. Even then, she developed an extraordinary feeling for rhythm, timing, and expression. What is less well known is that Amy carried notebooks with her even as a little girl. In them, she wrote down observations about people, fragments of conversations from the London Underground, and small stories she invented herself. This habit stayed with her throughout her life. Many of her later lyrics sounded so authentic because they were based on real observations, not on invented stories. When Amy was 9 years old, her parents separated. The divorce affected her far more deeply than she ever showed. Instead of talking openly about her emotions, she immersed herself even more in music and began writing her own lyrics. Music became her language. It allowed her to express pain, joy, disappointment, and loneliness in ways that ordinary conversations never could. This would remain one of the defining characteristics of her entire life. At the age of 12, Amy was accepted into the prestigious Sylvia Young Theatre School, one of Britain's best-known training grounds for young actors and musicians. She stood out almost immediately. Her voice sounded unusually mature, warm, and emotionally expressive for someone her age. At the same time, she had little patience for strict rules. She questioned teachers, disliked wearing a uniform, and refused to become someone she wasn't. To this day, many people believe she was expelled simply because of bad behavior. The truth is more complicated. Repeated lateness, poor discipline, and her unwillingness to fully conform to the school's expectations eventually led to her leaving. Looking back, one remarkable trait was already obvious. Amy never wanted to sound or look like anyone else. While many young singers tried to follow the latest trends, she was fascinated by the music of earlier decades. Soul, jazz, and rhythm and blues became her greatest inspirations. She admired artists who expressed genuine emotions instead of chasing commercial success. When Amy was 13, she received her first guitar. She spent countless hours alone in her room, learning chords, writing melodies, and experimenting with song ideas. Friends later recalled that she listened to old records repeatedly, rewinding certain passages over and over again to understand why a particular chord progression or vocal phrase created such a powerful emotional response. She was much more than a talented singer. Even as a teenager, she already thought like a songwriter, a composer, and an arranger. Another passion that relatively few people know about was her love for doo-wop, the vocal style that became popular during the 1950s. She was fascinated by its rich vocal harmonies and by the warm, intimate sound of classic studio recordings. Many of those influences would later find their way into her own albums, even though most listeners never consciously noticed them. Amy wasn't interested in copying the past. Instead, she blended those timeless musical traditions with modern songwriting, creating a style that sounded both nostalgic and completely original. During her teenage years, Amy formed a small rap group with a few friends and performed at school events. It quickly became obvious that her voice was extraordinary. It was raw, warm, soulful, and at the same time surprisingly vulnerable. But perhaps her greatest musical gift was her remarkable sense of rhythm. Musicians who later worked with her consistently said that Amy could immediately hear even the smallest rhythmic imperfections. Often, after only a few seconds, she would suggest subtle changes that made an entire performance feel more natural. Another little-known fact is that Amy was an enthusiastic reader. She loved studying song lyrics, poetry, and biographies of famous musicians. What fascinated her most was not fame itself, but understanding how great artists transform their deepest emotions into music. Even as a teenager, she had already made an important decision. She never wanted to become an ordinary pop singer. Her goal was to write honest music that people would still listen to and be moved by decades later. No one could have imagined that the strong-willed girl from North London would, within just a few years, become one of the most influential singers of the 21st century. Her rise was astonishingly fast. In 2003, at the age of just 19, she released her debut album, Frank, named after one of her greatest musical heroes, Frank Sinatra. The album revealed a young artist with an unmistakable voice and a songwriting talent far beyond her years. Unlike many pop albums of the time, Frank was deeply personal. Amy wrote or co-wrote most of the songs herself, drawing directly from her own experiences, relationships, and emotions. Critics praised her honesty, her sophisticated jazz influences, and her mature vocal style. The album was nominated for the prestigious Mercury Prize and immediately established Amy as one of Britain's most promising new artists. Although Frank was a commercial success, Amy herself was not entirely satisfied with the final production. She felt that parts of the album had been shaped too heavily by the record company and did not fully reflect the sound she had envisioned. That desire for complete artistic freedom would later become one of the defining features of her career. Following the success of Frank, Amy disappeared from the public eye for a while. She continued writing songs, but this time she wanted absolute creative control. During this period, she drew inspiration from classic Motown, soul, jazz, rhythm and blues, and the girl groups of the 1950s and 1960s. Rather than following modern pop trends, she deliberately looked back to musical traditions that many people considered outdated. The result was extraordinary. In 2006, Amy released Back to Black, an album that would completely transform her life. The record combined vintage soul with brutally honest lyrics about heartbreak, addiction, loneliness, and emotional vulnerability. Songs like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, Love is a Losing Game, and Back to Black quickly became international classics. Audiences immediately recognized something rare. Amy wasn't performing a role. She was singing her own life. Following the success of Frank, Amy disappeared from the public eye for a while. She continued writing songs, but this time she wanted absolute creative control. During this period, she drew inspiration from classic Motown, soul, jazz, rhythm and blues, and the girl groups of the 1950s and 1960s. Rather than following modern pop trends, she deliberately looked back to musical traditions that many people considered outdated. The result was extraordinary. In 2006, Amy released Back to Black, an album that would completely transform her life. The record combined vintage soul with brutally honest lyrics about heartbreak, addiction, loneliness, and emotional vulnerability. Songs like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, Love is a Losing Game, and Back to Black quickly became international classics. Audiences immediately recognized something rare. Amy wasn't performing a role. She was singing her own life. As Amy's fame continued to grow, so did the pressures surrounding her private life. Her turbulent relationship with Blake Fielder Civil became a constant source of media attention. Their romance was passionate, unpredictable, and often deeply destructive. Friends later described the relationship as one in which both partners intensified each other's emotional struggles. During these years, Amy's problems with alcohol became increasingly severe. She also experimented with hard drugs, including crack cocaine and heroin. What had begun as occasional use gradually developed into a dangerous addiction. Those close to her repeatedly tried to help. Family members, friends, and management encouraged her to seek treatment. There were periods of improvement, but lasting recovery proved difficult. The tabloids, however, showed little compassion. Instead of focusing on her extraordinary musical talent, newspapers often published photographs of her worst moments. Every setback became public entertainment, making it even harder for Amy to find peace away from the spotlight. Despite everything she was going through, Amy never lost her extraordinary musical abilities. Musicians who worked with her often recalled that she remained astonishingly professional in the recording studio. Even on difficult days, she could immediately recognize subtle changes in rhythm, harmony, or phrasing that many others completely overlooked. One of the most remarkable moments of her later career came in 2011 when she recorded the duet Body and Soul with Tony Bennett. Bennett later said that Amy possessed one of the greatest jazz voices he had ever heard, and believed she could have become one of the defining singers of her generation had she lived longer. Yet away from the recording studio, her health continued to deteriorate. Years of alcohol abuse, eating disorders, emotional stress, and repeated relapses had taken a heavy toll on both her body and her mind. Although there were signs that she wanted to rebuild her life, the damage caused by years of addiction had become increasingly difficult to overcome. On July 23, 2011, Amy Winehouse was found dead in her home in Camden, North London. She was only 27 years old. The official investigation concluded that she died from alcohol poisoning after consuming a large amount of alcohol following a period of abstinence. Her body had lost much of its tolerance, making the relapse particularly dangerous. Her death shocked millions of people around the world. Amy became one of the most prominent members of the so-called 27 Club, the group of legendary musicians who died at the age of 27. Yet, reducing her story to that tragic fact alone would ignore what truly made her exceptional. Amy Winehouse changed modern music by bringing classic soul and jazz back into the mainstream. while writing songs of remarkable honesty and emotional depth. More than a decade after her death, her recordings continue to inspire new generations of musicians and listeners around the world. Amy Winehouse left behind only 2 studio albums, yet their influence has been extraordinary. Few artists have managed to shape modern music with such a small body of work. Her recordings continue to inspire singers, songwriters, and musicians across the world. What made Amy truly unique was her authenticity. She never tried to create the image of a perfect celebrity. Instead, she wrote about heartbreak, self-doubt, love, addiction, and regret with a level of honesty that was often uncomfortable but always deeply human. Her songs were never simply performances. They were personal confessions. That honesty created a rare connection with audiences. People didn't just hear her music, they felt it. Many critics now regard Back to Black as one of the greatest albums of the 21st century. Its influence can be heard in countless artists who followed, proving that Amy's musical vision continues to resonate long after her passing. Although her career lasted only a few short years, her voice remains instantly recognizable, warm, soulful, vulnerable, and powerful at the same time. It is a voice that cannot be mistaken for anyone else's. For many listeners, Amy Winehouse was far more than an exceptional singer. She became one of the defining voices of her generation. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Amy Winehouse is not simply that she died at the age of 27. It is the music the world will never hear. Many people who worked closely with her believed that her greatest artistic achievements still lay ahead. She possessed an extraordinary gift for combining jazz, soul, rhythm, and blues, and deeply personal storytelling in a way that felt completely timeless. Today, her legacy reaches far beyond record sales and awards. She reminded the world that genuine emotion will always outlast fashionable trends. At the same time, her life serves as a powerful reminder of the destructive consequences of addiction, the immense pressure that fame can place on vulnerable people, and the importance of compassion over judgment. Amy Winehouse was not defined by the headlines. She was defined by her music. More than a decade after her death, her voice continues to move millions of people around the world. And as long as her songs are played, her story will never truly come to an end. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.